Every story needs some kind of conflict for the main characters to overcome, and sometimes the conflict can be driven by an antagonist the same way the protagonists drive the plot. Patlabor is home to many different villains and antagonists, whether they be people, machines, or monsters, but today we'll be covering Patlabor's most notorious villain, Utsumi, also known as Richard Wong. Before I start this video, I'd like to mention that it does contain spoilers for the manga, so how about you stop procrastinating already and read it? Yes, I'm talking to you. Anyways, on with the video. To briefly catch you up on who exactly Utsumi is, he's a very eccentric man who works for Shaft Enterprises and heads the video game development section. However, this is more of a front, as he's actually Planning Section 7's manager. Planning Section 7 would oversee the development of the Type J9 Griffin, one of, if not the most powerful labors ever created. However, after several test runs against military labors and a run-in with the police, suspicions would arise after Takeo Kumagami recognized Utsumi at the scene of the crime. This would kickstart an entire campaign where Utsumi played keyboy with the Griffin after his own boss Tokunaga demanded he return it. This, as well as the police department doing their best to track down who was behind the series of Griffin incidents. Depending on whether you watched the anime or read the manga, it ended with either Utsumi escaping with Kurosaki after destroying the Griffin for good, or, now to a chance to skip to the timestamp, he is stabbed by Jake at Tokyo's Hermes ship terminal before he can escape to South America, where he'd bleed out and die. A lot more of a gruesome fate, I know. Utsumi is a very interesting antagonist, completely different from the other antagonists such as Kai or Suge or Nishiwaki. The way he looks, the way he acts, and how he perceives the world makes him a pretty unique villain. Dare I say, enjoyable to watch.
This is all your fault. I finally stood up to him!
He's opportunistic. If an opportunity presents itself, he'll take it. Masami Yuuki likes to describe his crimes as theatrical, drawing a comparison to the movie The Man Who Stole the Sun. But that's as far as the comparison he can draw, because he never really watched the movie in the first place. But in order to prick the brain of this precarious person, we're going to have to go into a bit more detail. Starting from the beginning, the earliest activity we know from Utsumi is his time in Hong Kong. Utsumi would be in Hong Kong under the pseudonym Richard Wong, getting tangled up in the business of the local mafia, eventually running into Kumagami. At first, their relationship would have a rough start, but the two would become very close, the relationship blossoming into something intimate. Unfortunately, Utsumi is called away and suddenly leaves Hong Kong in Kumagami's life. Despite their brief encounter, Utsumi's attraction to Kumagami shouldn't go understated. This all took place in 1995, and the next time they'd ever meet would be in 1999. 4 whole years without contact between one another. And yet, after all this time, Utsumi still can't help but feel drawn to her. He himself admits that he still loved her at the end of the New Files, and in the later volumes of the manga, he was willing to go through great lengths just to have her back. That kind of thing happens to be pretty consistent with Utsumi's character. He's not the kind of guy who's willing to give something up. A big example we already know is the Griffin. Despite demands from superior Tokunaga, despite Shaft's own private military deploying to apprehend him, and even when the police managed to actually defeat it, he was unwilling to let it fall in the hands of anyone else if he didn't want it to. And to be honest, I get it. The Griffin is a magnum opus of a labor. Anyone would be hesitant to just give it up. But the lengths this man went through just to make sure the Griffin was only in the possession of Planning Section 7 was immense. He was blowing people up left and right, really grazing the boundaries of his own no killing my presence rule. In the manga, he went as far as to make a fake Griffin, hide it at his boss's vacation home, and then blow the truck it was in up. This action got his boss in trouble with the police, which then led him to being put into custody for blurring out the Griffin's name when it wasn't made publicly yet. This also happens to be the case with Bud as well, albeit a lot more blatant in the manga. Bud, while an amazing pilot, was only meant to be temporary. This was insinuated and outright stated by Kurosaki. The usage of the Griffin was purely to inspire bidders to purchase its development team, or, if you follow the manga, have Shaft's Far East manager purchase the technology. Though, when confronted with the idea of letting Bud go, Utsumi would be hesitant to consider such a possibility. Such as when Bud takes too long to withdraw from the battle at the castle gate, and Kurosaki says they have to abandon him. This was also the case when in the manga, Bud would run away and end up in the custody of Section 2. Even when he still had the Griffin, and was out of the hands of both the police and his own boss, he would still pull up to Section 2, commence a raid on the station house, and endanger the lives of everyone there just to get Bud back. Of course, this all be for naught, as he'd humor Bud's innate desire to pop the Griffin and have him fight against Noah and the Ingram. The result being the Ingram defeating the Griffin and Bud now being in the hands of someone who's a lot more responsible than Utsumi. Now, this may seem contradictory given that Utsumi still escaped without Bud in tow. After all this, he just lets him go and tries to escape? Didn't go back from him or anything? Well, that's because he would get something just as valuable to him in return, that being Kumagami. I've mentioned her name a few times before already, but her relationship with Utsumi brings out something a lot more twisted within him. In the later chapters of the manga, Utsumi would elicit a meeting between the two. Ultimately, his goal was to hold her hostage unless the police would hand over Bud back, something they'd be reluctant to do as Bud was an important suspect in the Griffin case. Goto would even state that he doesn't even have proof that he has Kumagami, so after Utsumi tries to catch up on the times with Kumagami, he'd use narcotics to make her sleep, and then would send in her bra in the mail as proof of his possession of her. And when they still don't take him up on the offer, he conducts a full-scale raid on Section 2. He pretty much succeeded at bringing it to its knees almost, if not for Noah and the Ingram. By this point, Utsumi and the rest of Planet Section 7 tries to make their getaway. Kumagami asks what they plan on doing after the Great Wall's arrival is delayed due to the oncoming typhoon. Kurosaki grows tired of her prodding and asks what she would do if she knew. Right as he'd load his handgun, Utsumi would be laughing uncontrollably. It's definitely a strange sight to see, and it makes you wonder what's going on with him mentally. Maybe it could have been the irony of the situation after claiming he was too lucky to lose at that point. But he grows more hysterical after Kurosaki fired a warning shot and threatened to hit Kumagami with a remaining bullet. Utsumi already lost the Griffin as it was destroyed by Section 2, losing Bud by proxy as well, and he was appalled at the idea of leaving Kumagami behind, or Kurosaki killing her. Utsumi asks, "Do you really want me to lose everything?" Kumagami responds with, "Tell me exactly what you lost," or simply, "Tell me that you didn't manage to get what you wanted. Did you think that you could attain whatever you want just by throwing a tantrum?" That line sticks out to me, and sheds more light on the psychology of Utsumi. I would have mentioned this sooner, but I felt my point would have been too obvious too soon. Hell, it's pretty obvious even when you read it. Matsui, Goto, and Kumagami are discussing the latest Griffin-related incident, that being Utsumi detonating the truck carrying the fake Griffin. They equate his behavior to that of a child, one who breaks their toys in an outburst of anger when things don't go their way. An astute observation given that this is exactly what happened, Utsumi not wanting to give away the Griffin to Tokunaga, blowing it up in his face and getting him in trouble instead. Utsumi's jovial manner, his destructive tendencies, and his desire to do whatever it takes to get what he wants, all while refusing to take responsibility, isn't unlike a child. There's another thing I find interesting about Utsumi, and that would be his love life. If you haven't noticed in the manga, Utsumi isn't above being an improper man. He could be seen flirting with other women, watching some suggestive programming, and in the middle of his conversation with Goto, looking at what seems to be some kind of escort service. And when you take a look at this panel, you can clearly see he's looking at women in police uniforms. While extremely funny, it's also telling about the state of mind this guy is in. Unlike the anime where the reunion was brief and Utsumi was taking off after clearing the air, Utsumi probably feels as if he can't live without Kumagami. He surrounds himself with women and indulges with them the same way he did with Kumagami in Hong Kong, willing to even have them dress up in a similar fashion in hopes that it sparks something. Of course, nothing would ever compare to the way he felt with Kumagami. So, the most logical thing to do, I guess in his mind, was to just go with Kumagami. Even when his transactional plan failed, he continued to pursue Bud, and refused to give up Kumagami once he had Bud in his possession. In the end, he kind of did get what he wanted, but it was extremely short-lived. Bud gone, Gut stabbed, Kumagami likely going back to Section 2. As Masami Yuuki himself stated, he was doomed the second he blew up that truck. Not that one, the other one. Utsumi to me is a cunning man with human desires and juvenile ways of attaining them. His ambitions aren't as incoherent as Kai's, but not as grand as Suge's. He wants to show how great the Griffin is while wanting to maintain a paternal-like relationship with Bud, on top of him being a great pilot. That along with wanting a woman like Kumagami to be his lover, whether or not the feeling is mutual. And whether or not the feeling is actually mutual or something he believes to be shared between him and Kumagami, it doesn't matter. In all cases, he's going to want her at his side. Despite working in Shaft Enterprises, which is probably the largest company we know in the Patlabor universe, he believes himself to be nothing without the three of these things in his life. And to be fair, I do kind of understand. In comparison to Noah, who's been building herself up in skill and maturity across the events of the manga, Utsumi on the other hand began to lose everything in this balancing act of trying to cover all his bases. After his insubordination at the castle gate, there was no guarantee that his position at Shaft would be maintained. Chance after chance of proving the Griffin's worth to Kyokudo slipped out of his grasp ever so slightly. Then it all came crashing down once Bud finally ran away, and when he tried to recuperate from this loss, it all come crashing down again with him losing Bud, Kumagami, and basically his life. That's another thing mentioned by Masami Yuuki. Utsumi isn't a person who thinks about the future, at least not too often. His decisions, sometimes described as tantrums, can be impulsive, doing things that guarantee himself a temporary victory at best. When it comes down to the longevity of these decisions, he's none the wiser. Like, when he had Noah fight Bud at the end of the manga, do you honestly think he had a plan for if Bud lost and I couldn't get him back? Again, it's not like he sees Bud as expendable as Kurosaki does. He clearly does care a lot for Bud, but if he didn't want to end up abandoning Bud, then this wasn't a very smart thing to do in the long run. Same with blowing up the truck. He was pretty much surrounded by Shaft officials who already weren't too keen on his behavior. He even knew Kurosaki had been reconsidering his allegiance within Shaft after Tokunaga's intervention. They could have just stopped him then and there if Kurosaki wasn't such a loyal guy. You can honestly thank the manga for giving Utsumi the material that makes him such an interesting character. He has a lot going on for him when it comes to his dynamic with Shaft Enterprises and the main characters. Not many other characters have the luxury of appearing in the anime as well as the manga, and consistently appearing enough to warrant an in-depth look at. I'm glad Yuki took this approach by focusing on him and Shaft Enterprises while the movies dealt with more political topics. With that being said, I believe that'll be the end of this video. Thank you for watching, like, subscribe, and I'll be seeing you. Closing notes before I go. Sorry for my infrequent upload schedule. Like Utsumi, I try to cover as many bases as possible when it comes to Patlabor, and making videos is one of those bases. I do almost everything on my own. I don't hire anyone. I do all my art, editing, information gathering, all me. That's all me. I also do my best to supply the wiki with sufficient information. It's not all complete. It's not like a perfect state at all either. But if you want to find your favorite character or your favorite labor, there's a good chance it'll be there. I have more video ideas ready to go. I just need to get around to committing to that, getting to them and all that. But yeah, thank you for watching.